Good evening. Welcome to St. Mary's. Welcome to Sundays at 7. Tonight's a special evening because the subject matter tonight is such that we try to encourage either people who've been through this issue tonight or have got children or grandchildren who might be going through this issue tonight or might be wanting to know more about almost the world we live in today. So please listen very carefully to what everything our guest has to say tonight, because it's very much of today. My name's David. I'm your host for Sundays at 7, an evening of opportunity when we get to listen to the story of a Christian who has a story to tell about her life and her young life as it stands out tonight. Just before we begin, somebody said to me the other day, I like it when you reflect on something that's happened during the week. Well, of course, nothing ever happens. Except for one thing. A couple of weeks ago now, I went with my wife to the outlet village, Cheshire Oaks, and we went to the Marks and Spencer's outlet store. And I love watching people. And when a husband and wife go shopping, it's what I call follow my leader. Wife goes off, husband follows around to the best of his ability. My wife had gone in to try a dress on, so I'm sitting down, and this woman and a man comes over, and she says to him, you need a pair of shorts. He said, I've got a pair of shorts. Yeah, but you've only got one pair, you need two, because we're going on holiday. You need a second pair of shorts. Try these on. So he says, okay. So he goes off and he tries these on and he comes back and he could hardly do them up. So she said, you need to be on a diet. She said, but, they just don't fit. She said, what size are you? He said, 34 waist. She said, well, they're. Oh no, they're 28. And I'm sitting there going, yes. I just like watching people and observing what they say and what they do. Tonight's guest. Lauren Windle was brought up in a Christian family, Christian home, was taken to church, different churches, by her mum, and let's just say it didn't quite work out. As life went on, her life went downhill from probably the age of 13 onwards. And she told me that the special day in her life was the 22nd of April 2014, because that was the day when she stopped taking the wrong things and was controlled by addiction. Every year she celebrates that date in a way that you can only understand if maybe it's either affected you or you know somebody else who is. She's going to tell her story tonight. I know you will be moved by what she has to say. And if there's anything that really does disturb you, please come forward afterwards and speak to her about it. She would love, I mean this, love to speak to you. We're serving tea and coffee in the cafe area afterwards. Maybe you want to have a word with her there. She's not going back home to London till tomorrow morning. Please don't walk away if you feel, do you know what, I'd like to ask her about this, I'd like to ask her about that. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to Lauren Windle.
What a lovely introduction.
Are you switched on?
I hope so. Am I switched on?
Yeah.
Someone described you as the Church of England's Parkinson. And I get it. I feel like I'm on, Parkinson. They said definitely not Graham Norton, though, which I think is a shame. Oh.
you want to start the interview?
Whenever you're ready.
Lauren, welcome to Sundays at 7.
Thank you.
Tonight's interview is like very much a game of two halves, really. The first part is about your experience and struggle with addiction. And in the second part, or at least the second half of the second part, I'd like to talk to you about the book you've written, which is, you've got a copy there, which is called Notes on Love, which is about being single and dating in a marriage-obsessed church.
Yes.
So, to begin with, I've read a lot about you, I've spoken to you, and emailed you, so I think I've got a basic understanding of the catalogue of events. But 3 people, as I mentioned, have been crucial to you: your parents, Pam and Tom, and your sister, Kathy. You were born into a Christian family, and your mum took you to several different churches over the years, and you weren't impressed with any of them. Why was that?
Yeah, I think, so more recently, when I've been thinking about this and unpicking it, because there's a sort of, I was 13 when I stopped going to church, and that's when my mum gave me the option and said, look, you're old enough, if you want to stay home, then you can. And I jumped at the chance. And I think that now, sort of having come back to faith, I've looked at it and I've asked myself that question. And basically, it's, I read that Gandhi said, I like your Christ, I don't like your Christians. And I think that that's pretty much sums it up for me. I felt really judged and really uncomfortable, and I was at a stage where I was trying to work out what decisions I was going to make and who I was going to be. And around the time I was allowed to stop going to church, I was also introduced to drinking and smoking and things like that. And I remember one of the Sunday school leaders saying, you know, I'm going to pray for you all, but when I do, God's going to tell me your secrets. And so if you don't want prayer, raise your hand. And I put my hand up straight away. No, thank you. I didn't know her very well. I didn't like the idea of that. She was really gung-ho. And yeah, I just really struggled, and I was in South London, and the church youth group, I got beaten up at the church youth group once, and I was at the bus stop and bumped into someone from my Sunday school, and they checked my pockets. It just didn't feel like a very safe or welcoming environment, either from the adults, who obviously didn't do any of that stuff, but I just didn't feel, I didn't feel embraced. I felt judged. That's basically the word I'd say, yeah.
Were there other aspects of it that you also found difficult to come to terms with? Because you've said a lot of things about it. I mean, even the moral side of it you found difficult to cope with, didn't you?
Did I find the moral side? I felt like you are seriously well researched, so this must relate to something I've previously said. What's coming to mind for me is that I found the way that we were instructed as teenagers very difficult, in terms of, you know, here's a list of things not to do, with no further explanation. And basically what I found, and what I think a lot of people find when it comes to youth, young people, teenagers, is if they're not having sex, they're not drinking, and they're not taking drugs, they're considered to be, a tick box, your youth leader's done a good job, off you go. When actually, you know, those are not the three deadly sins that the only thing the Bible talks about. There's so many ways that we need to be equipping young people. There are so many other sins and character defects that we could be focusing on that maybe aren't as obvious. And I just felt that was the focus, and if you fell short, you were bad, full stop, and nobody ever sort of treated the young people, or I felt I wasn't treated like an adult. I was just told no, without any sort of further explanation or loving care within it.
Was it just a teenager rebelling against everything? Or was it specifically going to church? Because you must have been involved, you must have gone, seen all your friends and all the rest of it. Presumably it wasn't cool to go to church anyway.
Is it not cool to go to church? Yeah, no, it probably wasn't. I can't remember that being a motivation, but I was very motivated by being cool. So it would stand to reason that that may have contributed to me stepping away from church. I think probably was a teenager. Was it a teenager rebelling against everything? I was really unhappy as a teenager. I was really unhappy. And actually, when you hear stories of addicts, sometimes they run through a list of things and they're like, parents were addicts, and then I went into care, and then this happened. Maybe there was some sort of childhood abuse or something like that, and you're like, wow, I'm so sorry that happened to you, but I can see why you sort of turned to drugs and alcohol, and that's not my story. I was really loved and really cared for by my parents, who were very present in our lives. Actually, if anything, the things that threw me off were my peers. I didn't enjoy school in the slightest. I didn't feel I had a community of my peers in church, and that's why I took the opportunity to leave. I always felt on the outside. I always felt socially uncomfortable. I always felt not good enough, rejected, that I had something to prove. And that's a really uncomfortable place to be. And it's an uncomfortable place to be as an adult, with the sort of benefit of life experience and things like that. But as a teenager, where you're not even really sure who you are anyway, and you're desperately trying to perform and live up to something, I found that, I felt everyone had been given a manual as to how to do life, and I must have nipped to the loo, because everyone seemed to know what they were doing. Yeah. And I felt like, and actually this is something I hear a lot of people who have struggled with or are struggling with addiction say, it seemed like when something happened, I felt it harder than other people. And I didn't know if they were hiding it, or if I was wrong and I was feeling more emotion around it, or if actually they just weren't feeling. I didn't understand, but all I knew was other people seemed to cope, seemed to take things in their stride in a way that I just couldn't.
Now, you mentioned the age 13. At 13, as you said, you were given the option to go to church or not, and you chose not. And again, you told me it was because of what you'd seen. At that same age, that's when you started smoking, didn't you? And then drinking more. What were you drinking? What was the catalogue in all of this?
Smirnoff Ice, often. Anything, basically. There used to be, I don't know if you guys remember, so when would have this been? 20 years ago, there were these big Iceland adverts, buy one, get one free. And that's basically what we would drink, because that was super cheap. So you could get Caribbean Twist, 2 litres, buy one, get one free. And I would go up to the counter whilst being on the phone to no one. I had a really big, bulky Nokia mobile phone with the antenna.
A brick?
Yeah, a brick. And I'd be like, oh no, he's just bringing the car round. I'm just getting a few drinks for tonight. I didn't have a car. I wasn't speaking to anyone. But anything I could do to make myself seem older so that I'd get served. And I always did. And actually, it was before they had that challenge. The government's changed the rules around drinking now. And there's a sort of challenge 21, challenge 25. You have to have ID if you look under 25. So when I was 17, that came in. And suddenly at 17, it was really hard to get hold of alcohol. Whereas when I was 13, I could walk into any shop and buy what I wanted. And that just wasn't a problem. And some of my friends who looked a little bit younger, they just got older siblings to get stuff for them. And that was it, yeah.
Was it just you, or is this all commonplace?
Oh, common. Well, certainly among my group of friends, it was commonplace. And I think that teenagers today don't have such a heavy, they have different challenges. Drinking's still very much a thing, but it's not quite as much of a thing as it was for me. So I'm 34 now, so we're talking 20 years ago that I was experimenting with drinking, that I was drinking underage. And we were coming off the back of that ladette culture of the 90s. So it was still very much that women who could keep up with men drinking, that was the sort of applauded thing. If you could drink the blokes under the table. And that filtered down to my age, for sure, and definitely influenced the way that we socialized, the way that we drank. And as far as we were concerned, the more you could drink, the better. The more you could get your hands on, the more you could tolerate without throwing up. That was it. But the difference is, I was drinking in the same way than a lot of people around me who never developed to have any kind of problem with alcohol or anything like that. Because problem drinking and you'd say alcoholism is like the most popular word. It's kind of outlawed because it's got quite a stigma around it. So it's now alcohol use disorder. But I'm quite happy to identify as an alcoholic. Some other people wouldn't be. But basically, they look the same until you both try and stop. And a problem drinker, circumstances will change. They'll get a job, or they'll start doing really badly at their grades in university, or they'll have a child, or they'll meet someone who's not comfortable with the amount they drink, or someone will challenge them and say, look, we're worried, and they will be able to rein it in. And that sort of problem drinking is for a season, for whilst they're, don't have that many responsibilities or had something going on in their lives. Whereas people who are addicted with alcoholism or alcohol use disorder, when they decide it's important to rein back, they can't. So it looked the same, I'd say, in my teenage years.
Were your parents aware that this was going on?
I think everyone thinks that their parents don't know what they're doing, but everyone's parents do know what they're doing, for sure. Like, my parents definitely knew I drank because they'd come and pick me up a few times from places when I'd drunk too much to get home myself. They knew I smoked because they'd found like cigarettes, lighters, cigarette butts in places and things like that. So yeah, they kind of knew.
How old were you when you went to university?
I took a gap year, so I was 19 by the time I went to university.
Okay. So ultimately you went to university, and am I right in saying that when you went to university, addiction went to a whole new level with the involvement of drugs, and at this stage you had an even wider personal freedom because you're away from home?
Almost. Drinking got worse at university for sure, and that I think is because drinking's really encouraged. As an alcoholic, you can hide in plain sight at university because every social event is surrounded by drinking. You're really encouraged to drink. You're told where the cheapest drinks can be found. There's a whole week before lectures even start to allow you to go out drinking and socializing, and universities often facilitate that. So drinking definitely got worse. I was in a relationship during university which was really codependent, very unhealthy. He had a drink and drugs problem. And that in itself, people talk about codependency and it's often treated in the same way that you would treat an addiction. So I'd say in that sense, I was clinging on to idols like never before. And one of those idols was that relationship and that partner. It was after university that he actually broke up with me, which left me with this big void because as far as I was concerned, he was my life raft, my crutch. I didn't have faith or God at this time, so he went off. I drank more than ever. And then I started taking drugs when I got a job in hospitality. I was working as an events manager for a group of restaurants in London. I thought I was very fancy. I started meeting people with more money, with access to like members clubs and things like that. And I saw this world, and having always, when I was younger, felt on the outside of things, I saw a world that I thought was really glamorous, that I really wanted to be on the inside of. So I did everything I could to be welcomed and accepted in that world, in that industry, with those people. And that's when I was introduced to cocaine.
In my naivety, if you like, and ignorance, two questions together. One, this must have now cost you a lot of money. So how did you fund it? And was this lifestyle really available? I mean, the further you went. So it must have cost you a lot of money.
Yes, taking drugs is expensive, particularly cocaine. I So a gram of cocaine when I was inflation hasn't just hit groceries. It's now far more expensive. Cost of living crisis, across the board. But it was £50 for a gram of cocaine, and towards the end I would have been taking 2 grams a night, so £100. Whereas now I think it's about 80 if you want to get a gram of cocaine of any kind of... I'm being quite specific, but you asked quite a specific question.
Yeah,
so, yes, but I was also a 22-year-old who'd walked into quite a well-paid job, and I was on a commission basis, and I was making good commission. So I didn't end up in debt, but I spent everything. And the end of the month was really tough as well, because I would be just slamming through my paychecks when they came. I was probably spending about 200 quid a week on drugs.
What effect was this having on you as a person?
What effect was it? Well, my first instinct was to say that I wasn't a very good person before I started taking the drugs, which feels a bit mean to past me. So I guess I wanted to be a good person, and I had the foundations of a good person, and there were times when I was really kind and really cared about my friends and really felt deeply when things went wrong for them and stuff like that. But I wasn't that great anyway. I was quite selfish, quite manipulative, quite happy to gossip, to lie, and things like that. So I'd say that I became increasingly self-focused. Not even self-focused, I was just focused on drugs, really, and focused on my short-term gains, because obviously long-term, well, not obviously, but for me, long-term, it was very damaging, but short-term, it felt like the relief I needed. So yeah, that was just my primary focus. I distanced myself from the people I cared about. I surrounded myself with people who took drugs in the same way that I did, so in a really horrific way. I definitely started to dislike myself more and more, and I started to value myself less and less with every incident and night and that turned into morning. And to answer your earlier question, yes, that lifestyle absolutely was available to me, and I could ingratiate myself with those people and be really fun and go out and take those drugs and drink and blah, blah, blah. But at 1 o'clock when they went home, I didn't. I stayed out on my own, and then I would be back home on my own again up until the early hours, taking drugs, smoking, drinking. And the thing, it's like that depiction of hell. Cocaine, and you're taking it, nothing's ever enough. You cannot satiate any desire. You can't talk enough, you can't take enough cocaine, you can't drink enough, you can't smoke enough, you can't stay up late enough. And when one of those finite things ends, like someone goes home or the sun rises and you start to hear the birds, so you will have to go to bed soon, or you run out of drugs or alcohol or cigarettes, you start to feel panicky because it's just never enough.
Things got to a very, very, very low point, and you made a phone call to your sister, Kathy.
Yes.
What was the result of that?
Yeah, so I called Kathy, my sister, and I said, can you come over after work? So it was Friday morning at 7:30 in the morning. I had just done a line of cocaine, and then my alarm went off to tell me to get up out of bed to go into work. Obviously, I hadn't slept, so I called my boss first, and I just said, I'm high, I'm not coming in. And then she could tell by that point that I was unwell. Yes, I was making poor choices and behaving badly, but this wasn't just somebody who was messing about. I was actually unwell, and I think she could tell that. And then once I got off the phone to her, I called my sister, and I said, can you come over straight away after work? So she did, and I can still picture her sitting on my sofa. And I said, things are just out of control and I really need your help. And she was like, okay, what's going on? And I said, I've been taking cocaine for years, and I can't stop. I don't know how to stop. I've tried to stop and I can't stop. Will you help me? And she, so that was the Friday. On the Saturday, her and her then boyfriend, now husband, came and moved all of my stuff out of my flat and moved me into her house. And then on the Sunday, she took me to a local church, and on the Monday, she sent me into work with a pre-typed resignation letter and said, sign that and give it to your boss, and we're going to work this out.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did these events lead to the 22nd of April 2014?
Well, it wasn't quite after that. So I didn't get the church thing. Really nice people, don't get me wrong. But I thought oh yeah, they do nice stuff for homeless people and stuff, but it's not for me. And my sister was gutted because she was like, God, you say that when someone reaches out to you, you reach back, and she's here, she's shown up. Why aren't you coming for her? Why aren't you, why aren't you scooping her up? Why doesn't she get it? So I carried on not really going to church. I carried on drinking, even though I distanced myself from drugs, and I deleted drug dealers' numbers and done all that I could to sort of get out of that lifestyle. And I actually left London and moved away. But I still carried on drinking really heavily. And it was about a year after I caught. So addicts always say that every rock bottom has a trap door. So that wasn't quite the rock bottom it should have been. I found the trap door. I kept going lower. And eventually I woke up in my apartment. I was in Paris. That's where I moved because I had a few friends who lived in France, with a black eye. Didn't really know how I got it. I'd been drinking all that night. I'd said I was going out for one glass of wine at 7 o'clock with a friend who was furious with me when I ordered a second. So she stormed out, and I just kept going, and I called for other people and created a party around myself. And when I woke up with that black eye and bruised and not really sure what had happened, she came into my room and she really told me about myself. And she said, I'm not watching you do this anymore. You told me that we were going out for one drink. I had a half cider, and suddenly, I go to the toilet and you'd ordered another, and we're not playing this game. You have moved here to get away from all of this stuff, so I'm going to need you to do something about it. And she looked up a bilingual recovery meeting for cocaine addicts for me, and she said, you're going to go to that. And I put it off for a couple of weeks, but then on April the 22nd of 22nd of April 2014, I finally walked up to that room and I pressed my ear against the door, and I was like, oh, they're speaking French. This isn't for me. This is definitely not where I'm supposed to be. So I turned to walk down the stairs, but every building in France, not every, a lot of the buildings in France have got a lift as well. And just as I went to go down the stairs to leave, lift doors open, woman comes out, and she goes, are you here for the meeting? And I was like, oh no, do you know what? I think this is just a mistake. And she just took my arm and she said, you sit next to me. And that was when I walked in. Yeah. I've jumped ahead, haven't I? You've got
No,
okay.
not at all.
Reel me back.
You said to me, I've always recognized, David, that there's a higher power existence in my life. How did you turn that lot into faith in Jesus?
So in these recovery meetings, they recommended to me that I went to 90 meetings in 90 days, right? So every day for effectively 3 months, had to turn up in a room and ask for the help of other people in recovery from addiction. And I agreed to do that. And it was the third day, and I remember saying, I'm doing a 90 and 90 is what we'll call it. And I'm on my third day, and this guy he was just about to share a bit of his story to the room. He was like, oh, just 87 to go then. He was American. And I was like, oh gosh, thanks, that's really encouraging. And then he went on to talk about his higher power. I can't even remember what his higher power was. It might have been nature or the wind or Mother Earth or something like that, but he certainly wasn't Christian. But what he did say to me was, you need a higher power. You need to work out what it is. It's not you. That's it. Go away and think about it. And the last time I'd engaged with anything spiritual had been when my mum took me to church, and I didn't like it, but I thought, well, I'll try this, and if this doesn't work out, I'll do what everyone else does and become a yoga instructor, right? So I Googled church, and I turned up at an English-speaking church, and I just sat through the service, and the vicar said, well, if anyone wants prayer at the end, please come up. And I went over, and I said, I'd like some prayer. He was like, yeah, sure. What can I pray for you for? And I said, well, I'm 5 days clean and sober from cocaine addiction. He was like, right, yeah, if I can get you to sit down. And then he pulled over this amazing couple, and he was like, we're just going to lay hands on you. So, okay, if I can just touch your shoulder. I was like, sure, yeah. He was like, and if you repeat after me, something about Jesus, something about being a sinner, something about accepting me into your life. I was like, this is all very weird. I don't know why I'm doing this, but if this is what you need, then I'll do it. And I sort of repeated that prayer back without really knowing what I was doing. And it became really clear that I was where I was supposed to be. And there were lots of little coincidences. Like, I've got a friend who calls them God instances, but that all feels a bit, Christian language to me. But yeah. And I had planned to going to my 5th recovery meeting straight after that church service. And I didn't know where it was, but I knew that I had an hour to get there once the service finished. So they said, stay for a cup of tea. Let's chat to you a bit more. We'd love to get to know you. And I was like, thank you. I've got to head off for this meeting. So I stepped out of the front door, and I put the address of the meeting into my maps, and the little blue dot went vroom, right to where I was. And I was like, well, this is broken. So I put the address in again, because I was like, show me where I am. And the meeting was in that church an hour later. So I went straight back up to the first floor, and it was a church where they rented the church building off other people. So it was like at 3:30 in the afternoon or something. And I just sat with them and chatted to them, and then they had me come along to their women's group. And the first thing they did, it was the vicar's wife, this larger-than-life American woman who was so convinced she loved me and had to hug me. And I was like, why is she touching me? This is not very English. I'd rather she took a step back. Why is she saying she loves me? This is not normal. And she was like, look, just tell me, we're going to go around the circle, and everyone's going to say what they love about Christians. Because, Christians are so great. So, one person was like, oh, they're just so kind and generous. And someone else was like, oh, I've just seen them really walk with people or something. And I could feel myself getting really angry, because I was like, who are these Christians? I've not met these ones. So when it came around to me, I was just really honest, and I said nothing. Not seen anything I like from Christians. I felt judged. I haven't been looked after, haven't been supported. I've seen, vicars go off leave their wives and members of the congregation. I've seen all of this stuff that you hear about. And I was like, no, I'm here despite what I've seen from Christians. And she was just in tears. And she said, I know that wasn't me personally, but I just want to say I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that that's what you've been shown, that that's how you've been treated, and that that's the impression you've got of what this is about. And just give us a chance to show you what a faith in Jesus can be like. And I felt this weight lift off me. And I was like, okay, I'll stick around.
Lauren, there are grandparents here tonight. There are parents here tonight. There are young people. I know grandparents and parents get very, very worried about what their children are up to. Is there anything that parents or grandparents can do to be aware of what's going on? Is there anything at all, or is it just the way it is?
Oh, there's loads. In terms of raising children, there are some really clear things which nothing's determined, right? But there are clear things that increase risk of a child growing up and becoming an addict, and there are clear things that decrease risk, right? So stuff like if your parents drink at home excessively, if there's drug use at home, if there's a lot of unrest and arguments at home, scientifically proven your child is more likely. If they drop out of school, if they have well, research calls it a delinquent peer group, but like effectively friends who are also using drugs or getting up to sort of mischief and stuff like that, right? Things that protect young people, genuinely church, like peer-reviewed research suggests that if a child attends church regularly, they have more of a platform, more of a sort of safe grounding to stand on if maybe they're not feeling that at home. So church, and just it's the same things as we would want to give our children anyway, the safest possible environment for them not to feel the angst of constant warring at home, for them not to be exposed to drugs and alcohol at a young age. And just to be encouraged and boosted in their self-worth, their self-esteem, and hopefully their identity in Christ as well, if, in homes where they practice their faith.
You see, you can't get away from the fact. How do you enjoy a social life today, given that most social events are centered around alcohol? Because they are, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. You even tried to serve a bit of booze out there until I stopped you. Did you notice juice instead of wine?
That was all down to Lauren.
Sorry, I've ruined your Sunday night out. You can go to the pub afterwards if you want. Yes, I think, and I've heard this said a lot, if alcohol was discovered today, it'd be a Class A drug, right? The only reason that it's so socially acceptable is because it's been woven into the fabric of our society for years and years and years. And now we're at a place where people drink with virtually everything. You celebrate with alcohol, you commiserate with alcohol, you toast at weddings, you head to the pub after church, and everything in between. There's drinks at everything, right? And that can be difficult for me at times. I'm 9 years on, and I do find it hard at times.
Do you?
Definitely. And I make a choice before I go out, how am I going to feel if there's a lot of drinking around me? Yeah. If I think there's going to be drugs, then I just wouldn't bother. But if I know there's going to be a lot of drinking around me, and 9 times more than that, 99 times out of 100, I still go. But actually, there's one time in 100 where I actually just that doesn't feel like it's going to serve me. I get the question a lot from young people, like who are thinking that they may be addicted, who are thinking they may want to give up alcohol. And I do think it's getting increasingly more sort of commonplace for people to do that for a range of reasons. And when I stopped drinking, the only person talking about it publicly was Russell Brand, who's quite a polarizing character. Lots of people wouldn't really want to take his advice on things. But actually what he says on addiction is quite moving and very relatable for someone who's been in it. Whereas these days, social media, TikTok, Instagram, there's like loads of sober people talking about the fact that they are no longer drinking because it didn't help their anxiety levels or their productivity or their energy levels and things like that. So people are taking that choice not just because of addiction, but because of their general well-being, which does make it a bit easier. But what I would say so I thought that I would be giving up the misery of addiction for the misery of abstinence, and I couldn't have been more wrong. Nothing in my life is worse post giving up drinking. And I would never have believed that as a 25-year-old who centered her whole life around drugs and alcohol. I really thought I was trading in for half a life. But actually, and it took time for me to be able to go for dinner with my friends in a restaurant where there was, wine on the table and people were drinking. And it took time for me to be able to go to a pub and have a tonic water whilst other people are getting in rounds of beer. But I got there. I remember the first time I danced without alcohol. And I was like, what did I used to do with my arms? Had to sort of retrain myself. But all of these milestones were really important. And everything just became easier. But also, alongside getting used to doing normal life things that a young person does without drugs and alcohol, I was growing in myself and feeling more confident in myself and in my faith and who I was, and actually realizing that if somebody needed me to be drinking to spend time with them, then I didn't need them. And that's not a confidence that I had before that. So that was really special for me.
We've spent a lot of time talking about this because it's so important and it's the main thing. But I also want to talk to you about your book.
It just feels so trivial now that we've had this whole
No,
conversation.
no.
But yes, we can
You
talk
became a
about it.
Christian, you
Yeah.
go to church,
Yeah.
you gave your life to Jesus, and life has changed completely. But while you're in church, you then decide there's an issue there, and you want to write it. It's this book here. It's called Notes on Love. And Lauren was going to bring 40 copies of this here tonight for you to buy.
I've let you down, David.
I know.
No, it's
And
not my
let me get a word in here. She didn't bring them tonight because she went to another event on Thursday night and flogged the lot.
If I'm in demand, what can I do? You know, no. So I did. I took the books to Hillsong Liverpool. So you can rugby tackle a couple of their congregation to get them off them. But no, you can get them online. But also at the back, my Sam over here is going to be standing back there. So if you wanted one, we can take an order from you, sort it all out, and it will just drop through your letterbox in about a week's time. I wrote it because.
How much are they?
How much? Oh, I'm selling them for £8 here, but RRP is $10.99, so can't say fairer than that.
Special offer.
Special offer, just for you guys.
Can I ask you, before you tell me about it,
Yeah.
I researched into the book, and I found this description of your book. This is a book for anyone who struggled dating in a church or has asked themselves how to be single as a Christian, only to discover that there's no right answer. What is the book about? Why did you decide to write it? And is this from your experience?
Well, look, so I wanted to write a book on addiction, right? But I hadn't written I've never said this in an interview, this is really honest. But I'd never written a book before, and I didn't know what the process was like and how edited I would be. And I was worried that I'd send off this manuscript that meant everything to me, and an editor would butcher it, and then I'd be really heartbroken. So this was my tester book, right? I was like, what topic do I really care about, but not quite as much as addiction? So if they butcher my words, I won't feel quite as emotionally attached to them. And actually, what this book's turned into more of a ministry than just a book. And you know, given the sort of demographic and the congregation, I imagine lots of you guys here are married, but actually for those who are single of any age in the church, and I hear this from everyone from 18-year-olds to 70-year-olds, it can feel really lonely. And in church environment, you know, we should be in community. That's what the church is when it works well. Like, people can be single but never alone, and that just wasn't represented. It wasn't the conversations that I'm hearing. People felt that they were second-class citizens in the church structure if they didn't have a partner, and they weren't invited to take on more senior roles in the church and things like that. And actually, people felt very hurt by it. And that's kind of what the book was. And I think any woman who's been single in the church who's tried to read about it can feel quite frustrated, because there's just pictures, you know, these books have got like pictures of women skipping through wheat fields, like praying for your husband, you know, God's grace in the waiting. And you're like, oh, give over. You know, like, and it's all right, it's all correct. Like, yes, we've got to lean into God's grace, and we do have to, you know, practice patience and, you know, and realize that actually we have true love through God anyway. But actually that's all great, but was it very comforting to people who were really feeling the pain of hope deferred, of something that they're prayed for all of their life not coming through? And actually, I just wanted to write a book that felt like they were sitting having a coffee with a friend. So that's what I did. And actually, it's turned out to be a real encouragement to those people who are just like, oh, I can't do this anymore. Maybe I shouldn't date, or maybe I should date outside of the church, or, you know, I'm just going to keep going, but it's really making me feel low. So that's kind of who it's for. And it's, yeah, and I'd recommend it as a gift for people who, like, have called you crying and said, like, I just can't do this anymore, it's too disappointing, because I think it is encouraging. That's what I'd say about that.
In this fast-changing world, if someone asked you to go out with them and they weren't a Christian, would that be an issue for you?
I don't think, for me personally, I feel like I don't think this is a one-size-fits-all answer, right? Because for every one single man in the church, there's 2 single women. So it's very difficult for us to announce that we should only be dating in the church. I think that is gold standard. I think that is ideal. I think you really don't want to sort of align yourself with somebody who doesn't understand your faith, the process by which you make your decisions, consulting God, the Bible, and things like that. But also I recognize that practically that's not everyone's experience, everyone's opportunity. I think if it was somebody who really championed my faith, who saw how important it was, who did all they could to build me up in it, but maybe was not where I was within it, but was sort of seeking and open, then I think that that's a conversation worth having. But I think if you even get a hint that someone's going to pull you away from your relationship with God, that's what we're here for, So under those circumstances, I wouldn't.
Is singleness something not to be too concerned about?
People are concerned about it. So it's almost like you like saying oh, don't worry, but that doesn't stop anyone from worrying. Actually, what I realized when I spoke to some people is that the fact that they were still single after praying, or single again after maybe the breakdown of a relationship, or they've been widowed or something like that, was like the greatest disappointment of their lives. And people leaving the church because they felt their prayers weren't being answered. And actually, I think a lot of that is because it can feel so lonely to be in that place. And actually, that's just not what we want any of our sort of brothers and sisters in Christ to be feeling. And actually, the Bible's really clear that being single is not an inferior state. It's not reserved for the unattractive or the people who can't secure a husband or a wife. It's really admirable thing to decide to stay single so that you can contribute better to the kingdom of God. And even if you haven't made that decision, within your time single, even if you're hoping for a relationship to come later down the line, there's so much that you can do, and you have your unique set of challenges and perks. And if you get married, you're just trading in those challenges and perks for a different set of challenges and perks. It's equal but different. And people who are single often just don't feel that way.
Okay. What is Lauren Windle doing with her life these days? What are the things you're involved in?
Gosh, so I've got a show on TBN, the Christian TV channel, called Sisterhood, which I co-host with 2 incredible women, and we talk about things that affect Christian women, and we're just about to film the 2nd series of that. I present another show for Salt, which is the Christian dating app of choice for most people who are swiping left and right but have a faith. And I host their dating show where we sort of set people up, which is really good fun. I have another book coming out about women in the church, which is coming out on International Women's Day next year. And I edit the opinion page for Premier Christianity's Women Alive. Is that all I do? I think that's it.
I think that's pretty good.
Is that good? Yeah, okay.
I suppose in some ways this is a final question, but it's to give you a little bit of time to expand on it. Right up to your mid-20s, life has been a roller coaster, to say the least. Tell me about Jesus and what difference he has made to you.
Wow, that's probably the hardest and easiest question, isn't it? I guess people ask me if you can get into recovery without Jesus. And the answer is yes. There are lots of people who aren't Christian but are in sort of established recovery from addiction. But my goodness, I wouldn't have wanted to try. I don't know. I feel that it's unlikely I would have made it. I think that my faith, which grew very slowly, it wasn't like a boom, lightning bolt thing. It was just one step at a time, closer, learning about God first, then Jesus, then this mysterious Holy Spirit thing people talked about, like slowly building that relationship. And it became so pivotal and so central. And it's hard to sort of unpick what gifts would have been available to me if I hadn't known Jesus but had taken that journey of recovery. But I suspect I would have gone back out. I suspect I'd be drinking again. I certainly wouldn't care about myself and value myself, and I wouldn't have anywhere near the network of friends and the people I've met and the encouraging, all of those people I used to take drugs with and drink with are gone, and now I've just got a group of people who pray for me relentlessly, who support me. People always joke that I've always got a bunch of flowers on my table. And that's, people are so kind and supportive and appreciative of both the work I do and all of that stuff. And that's just incredible. I think the final thing is my life changed when I asked help me. When I asked my sister to help me, when I walked into that room and asked the other recovering addicts to help me, and when I walked into that church, asked the vicar and then Jesus to help me. And we can see that as weakness, right? You can't do it on your own, so you're going to have to ask someone else to help you. Actually, I just think that recognizing your limitations, I know so many people who are in recovery, I don't know anyone who did it on their own. Knowing that we are built to do things in community and this is just too hard to do on your own. The moment I said, help me, that's when my life changed. And I truly believe that no one has ever gone too far. No one is ever too old or too young or has done too many bad things or has taken too many drugs or spent too much money gambling or watched too much porn or whatever, they're drunk too much, whatever it is that they're struggling with. No one has ever gone too far to turn back, to ask for help and to go, Jesus, I can't sort this out on my own, you can. And what I've seen in my life is spectacular. And I just don't want to leave a man behind. It's like if everyone could see the life that's available to them on the other side of addiction, they'd be running at it now. But from within the cage that you've built around yourself, the trap that you've gotten stuck in as an addict, you just can't see past it. My biggest dream was that I would wash every day. Imagine God had just answered my one prayer. I want to wash every day and look after myself. He's given me so much more, but I just didn't know what to pray for because I didn't know how good life could get. And that's the sadness, because you don't fight for it, because you don't know how good it can be if you just surrender, if you just stop fighting and go, Jesus, on my own, this is not working, but you can do this, and then just watch him work. You've just got to get out of your own way and do something good for yourself. And that is my prayer for other people. And I'm just desperate for people to know what that's like on earth now, and then to travel through into glory. But even the idea of someone coming to Christ an hour before they die, yes, good, I want that, but do it now, because what is here on earth is just incredible. And and when I felt I didn't have that manual to live life and to cope with those strong emotions and to take each situation as it came and to sort of not be too fazed by things and to have wisdom and be here and be supportive to my friends and stuff like that, Jesus gave me that manual, Through the Bible, yes, but also through the teaching in the church and through my friendships and through prayer and my personal relationship with him. And I could not do life without it. And that's what I want for everyone.
An hour has gone like 2 minutes.
For us, maybe not for everyone.
Oh, I think so. You can hear a pin drop. It's been a privilege and an honor. I mean this, sitting, listening to you. I think you've been a help to so many people, and your honesty is incredible. Thank you for coming here tonight. Thank you for sharing your story and your life. And it's a pleasure to meet your boyfriend, Sam, as well, who's also a lovely guy. And it's just been a special evening. Ladies and gentlemen, Lauren Windle.